Hi, folks. So what we're going to start working on for the next part of our class is this concept called hand lettering. And what hand lettering is, essentially, is the act and the skill of going ahead and using these things and using these things and creating some really cool looking typography. Essentially, what hand lettering is essentially the ability to create communication and messaging and create letter forms and words without actual fonts. We have the ability to create a lot of our own rules and create all sorts of different kinds of typographic kind of masterpieces while we're working with hand lettering. It's a really fun medium, and really you only need to do a few things to actually make it work. So as I mentioned before, you need these, and you need some of these, preferably really sharp ones, okay? A dull pencil like this is not your friend when you hand letter. The other thing that you're going to need with that pencil is you're going to want to have one that's got a nice eraser on it. Again, this is the kind of eraser you do not want to have when you're hand lettering. In fact, if you can, get yourself like a kneaded eraser like this, one of these kind of like gummy ones. They're going to be, a good friend while you're working on this stuff. A straight edge can also be very helpful to you, and that's what we're going to kind of go with. So we're going to jump right in, and my goal is I'm going to show you some different techniques, and then you're going to have time to go ahead and experiment on your own. So the first technique that I really want to talk to you about is the low contrast sans serif. So sans serif being the one without tails, and low contrast, essentially, what do those words mean? What does low contrast mean? Low contrast basically means that our letter forms will not have a lot of contrast in regards to their visual weight. So this is a low contrast sans serif, and at the same time, this is also a low contrast sans serif. So it doesn't have to be a thin letter only, it could be a thicker letter. Low contrast just means that there's not a lot of contrast within the letter form, versus a high contrast letter, right, which might look a little something maybe like this. Where in the letter form itself we have a thick part, a thick weight, and we have a thin weight, right? Versus here we have all thin, here we have all thick. So again, this is low contrast, and this is low contrast, and this is not, okay? So that is our plan, right? That we're going to work with low contrast sans serifs. So again, a sans serif, if you're familiar with, you know what that is. That's the thing that, doesn't have the tails or the serifs. So what you need is you just need some paper, and you need some patience. And I'm going to start out, and I'm going to go ahead and take my, my ruler here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can kind of see what's going on. And I'm going to take my ruler, and I'm going to create a baseline. And I am purposely making my lines pretty thick so you can see them, okay? But I will tell you that you probably want to draw pretty thin when you're doing this, or else what's going to happen is you're going to have these really hard, thick lines to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and just make a baseline, and then I'm going to throw the ruler right on top of that baseline, and I'm going to make another line up here, and that's going to be my cap height, okay? And it's just another parallel line, right? So we have our baseline, and then over here we're going to have our cap height. Okay? So what we want to do is we want to start playing around with some different letter forms. So we're all familiar with letters, we're all familiar with numbers. We might not be super familiar with symbols, to be able to pull them, right out of thin air, but we are familiar with letter forms and number forms. So let's start with them. Let's start with some easy ones, okay? Let's start with like the letter M, for example. So the letter M, right? And actually, as I go, I wanna also just kind of point out to you, I'm gonna zoom out just a little bit here, right? As much as I can try, I'm gonna try to not do this, where I just flick my wrist, okay? Because A, that's gonna help give me carpal tunnel, and I've already type a lot, and I mouse a lot, so I wanna try not to just have that flicking motion. But B, I want to try to use my whole arm as much as possible, especially when I'm trying to create straight lines. If I just flick, I tend to not create such a straight line, but if I tend to push my whole arm forward, I can. So especially when we're creating letters, we want to think about that because line work is going to be really, really, really important, okay? So let's go back to that letter M. So it's got 2 vertical lines in it and 2 diagonals. That's what is in the letter M. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to just draw a vertical line. Now, in the real world, we would just go like this and draw the letter M. And by all means, you can do that if you want. But what happened here when I did that is I went straight up and then I came down here, right? And I have a certain angle relationship happening here. And then I pushed up on that angle and I pulled down on this, right? So since I pulled, I don't have such a straight line, it's got a little curve to it, and there's a whole different relationship happening here between that vertical and that diagonal. So you want to think about that sort of stuff. So I tend to, when I can and I have vertical lines, I tend to push from the bottom all the way up, and I try to, again, move that arm as much as possible. And then, okay, so when we're thinking about an M, right, there's all sorts of ways to create an M. I can create an M where I have, a center point, and I'll just go ahead and I'll draw that right in there for us, right? And I can draw an M, so it's going to come down and meet right about here, and then it's going to go up and it's going to meet right about there. And that's what an M looks like. And, that is a perfectly great M. I would point out that sometimes you can end up with some areas like this that can sometimes be a little awkward. Looking. Almost forgot how to spell that for a second. But yeah, so you want to be aware of that. Does that mean that you go ahead and when you create an M, that you go straight down all the time? All the way to the bottom? Do you do that when you create an M? Oh, maybe. In this circumstance, I don't think it's a good call because look, I have actually less width here of my entire letter form than I had here. And that's not enough width to get that angle to come down and to go back up. To do that, I would need to go ahead and have a much larger width here. See? I would need to have a much larger width to be able to compensate for that center point being right about there. And pulling this down, and pulling this down. That looks like a lot better M than that one does because it's thicker. So how about this? Could I go ahead and could I have a thin M? Could I go ahead and could I meet it just up really tall? Yeah, again, I could. That's something that is what I would say is quote unquote legal. Right? These are all things that you can do. Some are going to have better visual appearances in the end than others. That's all. And what I need to tell you is that I was a college student too, and I understand that you have a million things to do, and you just want to get the assignment done. And I'm going to tell you right now that when it comes to hand lettering, the assignment doesn't just get done. It takes time. Because you got to practice, okay? And so I'll sit there and I'll practice letters all the time, to be completely honest with you. Because it's hard to say exactly when you're going to have to use these things. I can remember one of the funnest hand lettering things that I ever had to do was I created a Halloween costume and I had to do a ton of lettering on it with magic marker. And so I did it all with pencil first, and then I went over the whole thing with marker. And I had to do script lettering, and I had to do lettering just like this. And I had a very short time frame in regards to building a costume, which is like 3 or 4 days, which sounds like a whole lot of time, but with all the lettering I had to do, it really wasn't. And luckily, I practiced this stuff pretty often. So what I'm getting at is that when you're doing this, you want to practice. It's going to help make perfect. It just truly is. Now, so those are M's. Let's go ahead and let's throw another letter up here that is very similar to an M. And just again, to show you that like you can kind of make your own rules a little bit. And that's the W. So the W, I'm going to go ahead, and unlike the M, it starts out with an angle, right? And I can go ahead and I can create that angle. It's just 2 V's in a row, right? So I can create 1 V and a second V. And that is a W, and that could work, okay? It 100% could. You can bring it all the way up to the cap height, just like you can bring this all the way down to the baseline, right? But you do need to understand that you need a whole lot of area to make that work. That's a lot of width right here. So if you have a very small amount to work with, like this, then what you may need to do is you may need to meet somewhere in the middle. And you could do that. Just be aware that sometimes you may be left with those kind of like weird, kind of awkward spots like that. Another fun way to do this is this. And this is, again, back to the whole concept of like, you make the rules. This is your, rodeo. You decide what you want to do. So check this out. Again, a W is 2 V's. Can they cross? Well, sure they can. Could they just, meet there instead of crossing? Could they do that? Yeah, sure. And see that, this is why you really want to go ahead and draw light, because it's really hard for me to make that go away. I'd really have to kind of push quite a bit. And I could. But it's going to dig into that paper for sure. Do you need to use special paper when you're playing around with this stuff? No way. Your sketchbook would be perfectly fine. A piece of photocopy paper like I'm working with right now would be totally fine too. Whatever you need to do. So here are just a couple letter forms. Let's take a quick look at it a little bit more, right? A couple more of the quote-unquote straight ones. And then we'll take a look at some of the ones that maybe have some curves to them. These are the ones that have crossbars. That's what I'd like to look at next, right? What is a crossbar? That's that horizontal bar that goes in the center of a letter form. And we see those things like in letters like this. A. Now, we also see them in letters like H. In letters like E and F. Now, they have some distinct kind of differences in that, right? So let's talk about the H first. So the H, what I'm going to want to do, and you'll see that I'll turn my paper sometimes like this when we're doing this, and I'll zoom in. And I'm just doing that so you can, it's more comfortable for me to draw with, and also so you can see a little bit better. So the H, right, I really want to try to find the middle point. And that's really where I want to put that, right? The E is just like the H. I want to try to find that middle point, right? Now, when we create an E, I kind of think about it almost kind of like it's a rectangle, right? It's just a rectangle here. And what I want to do is I want the top of the E and the bottom of the E to meet and create that rectangle. But this crossbar right here, I do not want that to go all the way across. Because if it did, it would just look weird. So I try to make that go across like maybe like 80%. The F, okay? And the A, we tend to go ahead and have those drop slightly under that midway part. And it seems to make our letter forms look a lot better when we do that. So let's go ahead with our A, and we'll drop that here. And let's do that, the same thing with our F. We'll drop that there. And again, the F about 80% across. And there you go. A-H-E-F. So we've got some diagonals. We've got some crossbars, some vertical lines, right? And these are all really important to hand lettering. In our next video, I'm going to take a look at curves, and because they kind of throw a little bit of extra kind of like curveball at us, no pun intended, and we'll see how that goes from there. But by all means, start practicing these letter forms. They're really going to help you out quite a bit. Thank you.